Supreme Court today struck down a very important part of the Voting Rights Act. It was a 5-4 decision. Of course, the conservatives were all on the side of striking down the Voting Rights Act. This act was passed in 1965 and has been enormously successful in bringing voting rights to minorities throughout this country. In fact, the majority accepts that and cites it as one of the reasons to kill the act. They say, well, it was so successful, we don't need it anymore. But how do you know you don't need it anymore if you didn't have any discrimination in voting because of it? And Joe Biden made a good point today. It's not like it hasn't been used. It's been used 700 times since 1982 to say, hey, wait a minute, you're not doing the right thing here. You need to allow people to vote. You're discriminating. 700 times. That's why it was successful. That was 700 times they would have discriminated if you had let them. Now, they didn't kill the whole law. There's a section 2 that says if you can prove discrimination after the fact, after the voting's already done and they already discriminated against you, and it's a really hard burden, well then, okay, we'll hear you out on that. But the part that was used most often is because it's more effective, is Section 5. In Section 5, the states and the areas in the country that had a history of discrimination had to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department or a court in Washington to say, we would like to change our voting laws to be able to do this. The reason they needed pre-clearance is because in the old days, and apparently all throughout, there were different times when they would say, I would like to change the voting law so that it's a little harder for, oh, I don't know, maybe poorer people to vote. Oh, golly gee, are more blacks and Latinos poorer? Voter ID laws. That's not ancient history. That's in the last election. Texas tried to do it. Arizona tried to do it. So many different states tried to do it. And oftentimes the Justice Department would say no, that you're denying access to people who do not have, for example, a driver's license. They might live in a big city. They don't need a license. So they're poor. They take a bus. You're discriminating against them. And that's not by accident. Look, it's not just that conservatives or Republicans are racist and want to deny black people to vote because of that, or Latinos or other groups. It's that they have an incentive to deny them the vote. Over 90% of African Americans vote for Democrats. If you're the Republican Party, what are you going to do? Of course they're going to try to deny blacks the vote. From time to time, they slip up and admit it. They say, well, those guys are on the other side. So racism is baked in to their political calculus. It almost has to be. And in this context, you've got 5 judges that come out and say, don't worry about it. Problem solved. You don't need that anymore. You don't need any prior clearance. Have at it. Change all the voting laws. And then if you get caught later after the elections, it might be an issue. So this is outrageous. And of course, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the dissenting opinion, and not surprisingly, she found it outrageous as well. She said the court's opinion can hardly be described as an exemplar of restrained and moderate decision making. She said quite the opposite. Hubris is a fit word for today's demolition of the Voting Rights Act. And look, those are harsh words, but understand something important underlying them. Remember, the conservatives are the ones that are always complaining about what? Judicial activism, right? Here is 5 justices on the court saying, even though Congress not only passed this, not just in 1965, but they reauthorize it all the time. In fact, they reauthorized it 6 years ago. You know what the vote was in the Senate? 98-0. But this judicially active court said, we don't give a damn what Congress says. We don't care that the president signed into law. We don't care about any of the other branches. We're going to decide you don't need it anymore. But Congress decided 98-0 recently that they did need it. Judicial activists. Ginsburg also said, in my judgment, the court errs egregiously by overriding Congress's decision. Well, which one is it, guys? If you're a conservative out there, do you hate judicial activism or do you love judicial activism? It depends on the case, doesn't it? So next time you're talking to me about judicial activism, shut up about it. Because this is as judicially active as it gets, overriding a 98-0 decision in the Senate, and the House wasn't much closer either. So now what happens immediately afterwards? So the conservatives, they jump in it. Immediately, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott says, with today's decision, the state's voter ID law will take effect immediately. Redistricting maps passed by the legislature may also take effect without approval from the federal government. So here we go again. Look, Texas has an enormous Latino population. It's growing so much that Republicans are scared to death that it is going to flip over from a red state to a blue state. And if it does that, they can never win another national election. It has too many electoral votes. So and what I mean by national, of course, is presidential elections where we count all those electoral votes. So the minute the Supreme Court says you're allowed to, Texas, like voter ID laws, what's your fraud problem? Have you shown any fraud? No, I got no fraud. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's more likely you're going to get struck by lightning in Texas than there's going to be voter fraud. It doesn't matter. The point is to make sure that minorities don't vote. And when you talk about minorities and discrimination, obviously, you'll get to Arizona. So Governor Jan Brewer, ecstatic about this decision. Watch.
Well, I was really, really pleased when I received the news this morning, really early this morning, by the way, that they had done away with the preclearance in so many states, and Arizona being included. It's hampered us for a long, long time. I think that we were being punished by the Voting Rights Act for indiscretions, bad things that took place, decades ago, and those haven't taken place any longer. We have grown.
700 instances since 1982. And the Voting Rights Act was protecting people in this election. The voter ID laws are the things that Republicans want to do today. And you think they don't know that if it affects minorities more? Here, if you don't know, let me give you a fact here. It's okay. Like, it's not your job to know. So this is very important. Do you know that 25% of African Americans in this country do not have a picture ID? That's because a lot of them don't own a car. A lot of them live in a big city and they take the subway, they take a bus, etc. And it's onerous. So you go to vote and they say, in the way that you've been voting your whole life, and then they come to you and they go, oh, no, you need a voter ID. You need to go over there and you need to spend a whole day at the whatever department and you need to pay a certain amount of money. And this used to be called a poll tax. You can't have people pay money to be able to vote. It was a way of discriminating against the poor and minorities. That's why we got rid of it. Now, here we go again, thanks to the Supreme Court. One more from Brewer.
Why should voters trust Arizona, the legislature, and the governor, whoever holds the office, to do the right thing when it comes to elections law?
Well, I think to find out who you vote for and who you elect and trust those people to do the right thing. I think.
Oh, yeah, just trust your government to do the right thing. By the way, how do I know who I elected if you wound up messing with the elections? So don't worry about it. No. Once we fix all the different ways that you can and can't vote, whoever gets into office that way, just trust them. Yeah, that sounds like a really good plan. It's a good plan if you're a Republican and you want to make sure that minorities and the poor don't vote that much. So the Supreme Court decision today is devastating, sets the country back, and for conservatives, it's mission accomplished.